Hello everybody. I'm going to take a look at the menstrual cycle in terms of the seasons: spring, summer, autumn and winter. I'm going to take a look at the menstrual cycle in terms of the seasons, because this is what a lot of you are doing in terms of connecting with your menstrual cycle. And I've been pondering for myself and also my friends and clients about how helpful it is for everybody to connect with these 4 seasons, especially for those of you who perhaps live in places where you don't have 4 seasons and you maybe don't have a spring and an autumn. So at the end of my presentation, I hope that you will think about how relevant it is for you, and please feel free to leave any comments down below, because I'd like to start a discussion about this and see how people are finding it all. So the spring, summer, autumn, winter, that's quite neat in a way. 4 seasons, 4 phases to the menstrual cycle. But in reality, how accurate is that? Are there 4 phases to the menstrual cycle of 4 equal time phases like spring, summer, autumn and winter? It's actually much more complex than that, and I want to start with really, what does spring, summer, autumn and winter mean? We have the 4 seasons throughout the year, but it really depends on which part of the world in which you live, whether the seasons are of equal length or different lengths. So in a way, already that's quite good, because our menstrual cycle is of many different lengths. So in the charts, and I am going to present my own versions of the charts soon, we do tend to put a 28-day cycle, because that is the average. And then spring, summer, autumn, winter have 7 days. That all sounds really neat, but I don't always find our bodies are quite as neat and organised and fit into these things as that. Thinking about where these seasons come from as well, I work a lot with Chinese medicine, and we use these relating to elements and to expressions of yin and yang. And yin and yang, in their simplest terms, are really: yin is more the night time and rest and inner movement, and yang is more the daytime, the sun, the brightest time, and a more outer movement. And the Chinese ideogram to represent yin and yang actually is a mountain which has half in shade and half in sun. So the sun is the yang and the yin is the shady side. This already shows the complexity of the seasons. Depends what time of year it is, how much light or dark you're going to have, and also where in the world the mountain is. So how does this relate to the menstrual cycle? I think we need to look at what is going on in the menstrual cycle, first of all, from a more physiological point of view. So I'm now going to show you a chart which I have created of the menstrual cycle based on our understanding of what's going on in a more physiological way. So in this chart we have our 28-day cycle, which is the average. We have to remember that how many of us are really average, and actually a normal length cycle is anything from 25 to 35 days. So if we look at what's going on, the first day typically of the menstrual cycle, we say is the first day of bleeding, it's menstruation. And in my chart we can see that the lining of the uterus, which is the inner red line, started off quite thick, day 28, It's already a little bit thinner, we'll come to that, but it's quite thick at day 28. Then the first day of the cycle, it starts to be released, and then typically for 2, 3, 4, perhaps 5 days, we lose blood. And then if we carry on down in the cycle, we're looking at what's happening in our womb. We see that blood starts to build up again. So this is the lining of the womb, gets thicker and thicker until we get to one of the other key moments in our cycle, ovulation. So on a typical or on an average 28-day cycle, ovulation is at day 14. It lasts about 24 to 36 hours. The egg is being released. After the egg is released at ovulation, if it's not fertilized, then it will only survive for about 24 hours or so. But what I find is often missed out when looking at this menstrual cycle is, regardless of whether the egg is fertilized or not, the follicle which it came from, so the follicle is basically the sac within the ovary. Each follicle contains one egg. So one egg comes to be released at ovulation in most cycles, not in every cycle. And then when it's released, it's either fertilized or not. But regardless, the follicle which it was released from carries on. And so this is why you can see in this chart that you have a yellow thing coming now. If you look back before ovulation, you'll see from day 1 that's the egg maturing. But you can also see from day 1 quite a few eggs start off. In my diagram I've only got 5, but it can be 5 to 15. But only 1 or occasionally 2 matures enough through these first 14 days to be released at ovulation. And the follicle or the fluid-filled sac from which this egg was released carries on, and it carries on becoming what is known as the corpus luteum, which basically means the yellow body, because it is yellow, like it shows in the diagram. It's taken up cholesterol from the bloodstream and it grows. So this follicle continues to grow after ovulation, and it reaches its maximal size around about day 21, day 22, and then it starts to decline. And then it's declining that triggers the release in the hormones that will then start the lining of the womb to become thinner and prepare for menstruation. And then you go back through the cycle again. And if we look at what's going on with the hormones from day 1 to day 14, you get a gradual building of estrogen, that's the blue line, which peaks just before ovulation, which then signals for the other 2 hormones, follicle stimulating and luteinizing hormones, which enable the release of the egg at ovulation. And then estrogen or estradiol is the form of estrogen. It starts to decline a bit, but actually it's still quite high, as you can see, because the corpus luteum is keeping the levels of estrogen quite high, but also in the levels of progesterone, which were low earlier on in the cycle, start to rise along with the growth of the corpus luteum. And when the corpus luteum starts declining, so too do levels of estrogen and progesterone, and it's that signals the beginning of menstruation, in the sense that the lining of the uterus starts to get thinner. So I do need to just add in a couple of other things from this chart. That why is the corpus luteum around for only a week? Basically, that's its length of time that is programmed by our body to grow. It has its life cycle, which is about a week to 10 days. Why does it start disintegrating? It starts disintegrating because a fertilised egg has not arrived in the womb itself and hasn't implanted. And if a fertilised egg doesn't implant, then the corpus luteum doesn't continue. But if a fertilised egg does implant, then the corpus luteum carries on for another 10 weeks or so while our placenta develops. So I think this is a really important phase of the cycle that's often not talked about, this first week after ovulation, when essentially it's the first week of pregnancy. Whether the egg is fertilised or not, our body still does the same thing. So I want to think about now how that might relate to the seasons. For me, it's a little bit complex. It doesn't necessarily relate to the seasons because there aren't 4 equal phases to the cycle. But I will give my thoughts about how it relates to the seasons, and we'll look at another chart in a moment to see how I'm recalling these names of the different phases of the cycle. Even the menstrual phase, I'm giving a different length and duration. So if you now want to look at the second diagram that we've got, a lot of the things are the same, except we don't have the lining of the womb, but we have the egg and we have the corpus luteum. And you might think, so menstruation we still see, but we've now got this nice green thing at the top which says releasing and transforming, because this is including the few days before we actually start bleeding, because it's the death essentially of the corpus luteum that triggers the hormonal changes that then lead to menstruation. And so we get this beginning of the releasing of the lining of the womb, which happens a few days before we actually start to bleed. So I actually now like to think of this as the whole menstrual phase, because it doesn't just start with the first day of blood loss. And so this whole phase from approximately 23 day to day 5 is releasing and transforming. And in terms of energies, that's about letting go, about bringing something out. It's actually like giving birth. We're giving birth, we're emptying out the lining of our womb, we're releasing something from outside our body. So it is a bit like giving birth, and like giving birth, once we've given birth, we probably need a bit of a rest. So how does this fit in with spring, summer, autumn, winter? Well, in fact, that first releasing phase, starting at about day 24, is really the beginning of the release of the spring energy coming, which is actually quite a dynamic energy. So the first phase of menstruation begins with the death of the corpus luteum and this releasing, which is actually like giving birth, and we get this outer movement, and giving birth is very much associated with spring. So this releasing phase is essentially what happens when we give birth in some ways, because we're clearing out our womb, we're releasing what was inside our body to outside our body. In a way, we could see it as a preparation, our body preparing for eventually having that potential to give birth. But it's letting go, it's a stage of ultimately transforming, because we release whatever we don't need. It's an opportunity for releasing whatever we don't need and letting go of it and clearing out, which offers an opportunity for transformation. And giving birth, or bringing something out, I talked about that earlier as being like the yang energy. It's going outwards. So any outward movement within our body, when our body's going out, is more like spring, like the shoots pushing through the earth, coming outwards. But after spring, we have summer, the fruit of coming out, or the shoot coming out, coming into a flower. And that's actually, in terms of the seasons, we have spring coming into summer, but then quite quickly in the menstrual phase, because we're losing blood, which is letting go of energy that was within us, we're moving into the yin of autumn, and then into winter, when we're likely to feel tired and we need to rest. So in that sense of the 4 seasons, I would say that once we start bleeding and we start to feel tired and need rest, then that is more like winter. But we haven't just gone from winter in a simple way. We've actually had spring, summer, autumn, winter from the releasing or from the death of the corpus luteum. And so when we get to the end of our blood loss, that is the time in our cycle where we are the most empty, the most depleted, because we have used some of our energy to release. So this is actually a bit like after having given birth, that we are quite tired and we need to rest. And so this is a time when we need to build up our energies again. But also, not only have we needed to rest, we've been quite opened up to the outer world. And so we need to just gather ourselves back in order to then be able to build up our energies again, and not staying open. That's sometimes a thing that can happen for women after menstruation. We can be very open and sensitive, and maybe for some of us too open. So it's really important to then gather back in so that we can then start to build up our energies to nourish ourselves. Like if after we have given birth, that women in traditional societies after having a baby would stay at home and they'd rest, because it's considered that it's a time when we are very vulnerable. We can be vulnerable to infections, but we can be vulnerable to other people's influences in our lives. And so this capacity for gathering in is quite important. And then we want to build up our energies. So then you can see in this follicular phase, we need to build up our own energies. And in building up our energies, yes, this is very much like the energy of spring. We've had our rest at night time, which is winter time, after menstruation, and then our energies gradually start to build. How quickly this happens really depends on each individual woman. It depends how strong our energies were. Some women after menstruation feel immediately quite creative and full of energy, whereas other women don't necessarily. If they're very tired and depleted, it may take much longer to rebuild the energies. And so this phase after menstruation is a really important time to take care of ourselves, to nourish ourselves, to build our energy back up. And in a way, the spring may only come, for me, the spring may only come more towards ovulation, because perhaps for a few days the woman is still coming out of the winter. It's very early spring, it's still quite cold, it's still quite dark, and it takes time. Whereas other women, it's like as soon as they've released the blood, they spring back. And the ovulation is quite a short phase. Day 13 to 15, a day or two, the egg coming out of the ovary. Again, it's also a bit like a mini giving birth. The follicle releases the egg in a birth process, in a way, releasing. So there is a releasing, there's a manifestation, there's a maturation of the egg comes out, and it's a potential to meet a new energy, that of a sperm. And in people's idea of seeing the cycle of spring, summer, autumn, winter, yes, this is a very summery time, a time when we feel we want to connect with people. That's what summer is about, that yang outer movement, connecting perhaps sexually. And this is what our body wants to do biologically. There's a fertilized egg, or there's an egg waiting to be fertilized. And so for most women, our sexual energy is quite strong around that time, because we want our bodies saying, yes, I've got an egg, come and fertilize me. And that's the energy of manifestation. Yes, that is the summer. But after that, I think this is the bit, and this is why I went so much on about the corpus luteum earlier on. The lining of our womb is still building, whether the egg is fertilized or not, because our womb is getting ready. It's making a nest in a way. It's creating a space for an egg to implant. But our body doesn't know whether the egg is fertilized or not until it doesn't arrive. And this is why the corpus luteum has to stay for about a week or so, because that's how long it takes for a fertilized egg to travel down our fallopian tubes and arrive in our womb to implant. And our body does the same regardless of whether the egg is fertilized or not. It's getting ready. And it's only when an egg doesn't implant that the corpus luteum gets signals back from the womb to say, no, you don't need to stay anymore because there's no egg. And so that's when you get the change. So I think this is really important, this phase, while the corpus luteum is strong, the nurturing phase. Because really it's a week when we can all connect with essentially being pregnant. That's why our estrogen levels, in fact, stay fairly high. They drop a bit after ovulation, but they rise again. And that's why progesterone levels rise. And we also get another hormone, relaxin. We are essentially doing the same whether the egg is fertilized or not. So it's like the energy of pregnancy, it's a nurturing energy. Could we liken this to autumn? In some senses, perhaps, because it's a gathering in energy. It's a autumn yin, it's the afternoon, we gather in, we slow down. The early stages of pregnancy, we might have those feelings of gathering in, wanting to be a bit slower, wanting to be a bit more inside ourselves. But not necessarily. Every woman responds differently to pregnancy, and these changes are quite subtle. It's the very first few days, so it's only a week. But we all, if we ovulate in our cycle, we have a week of nurturing, of preparing to nurture another. Now, nurturing another is really about holding, containing, and being more inwards, but not necessarily autumn. It does have some autumnal qualities. So you can see, much as I love the 4 seasons as explaining different qualities of what's going on in our day-to-day life, it doesn't really correspond to 4 phases of the menstrual cycle as simply as spring, summer, autumn, winter. Spring isn't really totally that phase after menstruation. Summer is sort of ovulation. Autumn is kind of the nurturing, but it's a bit more than that. But certainly when the corpus luteum dies, that's not winter, that's going back to spring again. So I like connecting with the different qualities of these seasons because our menstrual cycle is affected by the seasons. Our menstrual cycle might change depending on whether we're in the winter or the spring, the outer winter, or the outer spring, or the outer summer. I don't know how it is for many of you, but certainly when I was menstruating, my cycle would be affected by the seasons because my energy was different in the seasons, by the outer seasons, and that would affect my inner seasons. But my inner seasons are quite complex and change from day to day, and that's why I find it more helpful for me to think of, yes, 4 phases of the cycle, but they're not 4 equal phases of the cycle. And for me, those phases are releasing and transforming. But that's more than just starting with day 1 of the cycle. It's more than just the bleeding, the menstruation. And then after menstruation, a gathering in that first needs to happen, and then a building up. And then manifesting is ovulation, and nurturing comes after. So there's still a nurturing phase, and still our energy needs to build. And so what I want to do now is link these 4 phases, because also for me the menstrual cycle prepares us for other phases of our life. And I've already mentioned that a little bit with referring to birth, with referring to the postnatal period. I think the menstrual cycle is so rich because it gives us as women an opportunity to express many different aspects of our creativity. And I know that some of you associate creativity with the spring and the summer, but each season brings a different quality of creativity, and that for me is what is really rich. And some women are more creative around ovulation, but some might be more creative during menstruation or during the corpus luteal phase. So I'd invite you to connect really now with all those different phases in this slightly different way that I am showing you. And so I'm going to do a little recap of the phases now, and looking, yes, at how the seasons do play out during these different phases. And then we'll finish with a connection, so you can just have a moment to feel how that all seems to make sense or not for you. So just take a moment to perhaps close your eyes. You've done a lot of looking at charts, so maybe you want to close your eyes and place your hands over your womb. This such powerful place in our body. Knowing also that if we place our hands on our lower abdomen, we're not physically touching our womb. Our womb is below our pubic bone. It's protected and deep within our body, but we can still connect energetically. So closing your eyes and just feeling the movement of your breath, making sure that you're in a comfortable position, and going inside your body and just listening in to the beauty that is your womb, how your womb builds up each month, filling with blood, building up her lining, but also how our womb is connected through our fallopian tubes to our ovaries, and our ovaries each month mature at least 5 to 10 follicles, eggs in their follicles. Each month are getting ready, but only 1 or possibly 2 reach maturity at which they can be released through ovulation and fertilized. And then our body goes through a cycle to prepare a place for this egg to land, whether it's fertilized or not. So keeping one hand over your lower abdomen, connecting with this creative center in your body, a place to create new life. Even after we are no longer bleeding, it's still a place of creativity. In the menopause, our creativity continues. So place a hand over your heart, and feel your heart beating. Your heart, which can send love to your womb, also blood, supporting the building of the lining of your womb, or supporting nourishment for your womb. And then just opening your eyes, coming back into the space around you. And connecting with the circle of life, the infinity symbol, by placing your thumb and your index fingers together and your other fingers together over your heart, so you connect inside your body but also outwards into space with others. I want to connect also with our brain, because our brain is a really powerful centre for regulating all these hormonal changes within our bodies, but also for connecting into space and to receive the support of the space around us and the seasons of where we're living, which nurture our body, which give us the nourishment to mature our eggs and to support a new life taking root in our body. But this new life needn't necessarily be a baby. It could be a new project, a new way of being, a new way of relating. So thank you all for listening to me, and I look forward to hearing how you respond. Please leave comments down below, and I hope that this can lead on to other discussions, and I will be doing more videos explaining about the powerful, extraordinary vessels of Chinese medicine and explaining a little bit more in detail about each of these 4 different phases of the menstrual cycle and the multi-layered richness of our female bodies.